Ma'am, why are you here? The colonel's voice cracked through the auditorium like a gunshot. 200 faces turned, frozen, because he wasn't looking at the newly promoted captain standing on stage. He was saluting the woman in the crowd everyone called a failure. Her own mother's hand went rigid around hers. 6 years. 6 years of get a real job. 6 years of being the family disappointment while her sister collected medals and toasts. 6 years of a secret so classified it had a body count attached to it, until one colonel's memory betrayed everything. Now, in front of the entire family, the truth was about to detonate. The missing months explained away, as finding herself were actually spent bleeding out in a military hospital nobody was allowed to visit. The temp jobs were cover stories for operations that don't exist on paper. And in 11 days that same silence would be the only thing standing between her sister and an ambush nobody saw coming. Reese Calloway, 28 years old, standing in a kitchen the size of a closet at 4 in the morning, barefoot on cold tile, breathing in fours, in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, because her body remembered a rhythm her mind refused to explain. She didn't turn on the lights, because the dark was easier, because in the dark nobody asked questions. Not the neighbors, not her mother, not the version of herself that used to believe life was supposed to look like something. The coffee maker gurgled. Small mercy. Outside, Denver was still asleep. Street lights bleeding orange through cheap blinds. A city that didn't know her name, didn't care what she used to be, didn't care what she still was underneath the flannel pajama pants and the tired eyes. Which was exactly how she liked it. Her phone buzzed against the counter, screen lighting up like a small accusation. Mom. She didn't answer right away. Let it ring twice, 3 times. Because answering too fast meant she had nothing better to do, and having nothing better to do was the whole problem, wasn't it? That was the story everyone believed. She picked it up on the 4th ring. Morning, Mom. It's not morning, Reese. It's the middle of the night. Carol Calloway's voice, sharp as ever, already tired of her before the sentence finished. I could see your little dot, the green one, on that app. You have the app that tracks when I'm online. I have the app that tells me my daughter doesn't sleep like a normal person. Reese closed her eyes, pressed 2 fingers to the bridge of her nose. I sleep fine, Mom. Do you? Not a question, a verdict. There was a pause, the kind of pause that had weight to it. Because Carol Calloway didn't do small talk before 6 a.m. She did agendas. I'm calling, her mother said, because Thanksgiving is in 11 days and your sister is coming home early. She has an announcement. Reese's jaw tightened. What kind of announcement? The kind that involves silver oak leaves, Reese. The kind that involves a promotion ceremony at Fort Ashworth that the whole family is expected to attend. Silence, because there it was. The comparison delivered before 8 ounces of coffee had even finished brewing. Effortless. Practiced. A blade so familiar it didn't even need sharpening anymore. That's great, Reese said, and meant it mostly. It is great. A beat. It would be nice if you had something to share too. Anything. A job. Hey, I don't know, Reese. A hobby that isn't running. I have a job. You have a temp position doing data entry for an insurance company that you started 6 weeks ago. That's not a career. That's a placeholder. Reese didn't answer. Because what could she say? That the temp job was real on paper and meant nothing underneath it. That there was a version of her, a whole other person, really, that Carol Calloway had never met and never would. Not because Reese didn't love her mother. She did. Desperately. In the exhausted way people love the parents who never quite see them. But because some doors don't open. Not for family. Not for anyone. I'll be there for Thanksgiving, Reese said instead. Good. A pause, softer now. Almost gentle. Almost. I just want you to be there for your sister Reese. She worked so hard for this. As if Reese hadn't worked hard for anything in her whole life. As if the 6 years since college hadn't been anything at all. A blank page. A waiting room. A woman treading water while everyone around her swam laps and touched the wall and got their times announced over a loudspeaker. I know she did, Reese said quietly. Her mother hung up without saying goodbye. She always did that. Efficient to the last syllable. Reese set the phone down on the counter, stared at the dark screen like it might apologize. It didn't. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere blocks away and faded into nothing, and Reese's whole body went still and alert for half a second before her mind caught up and told her it was fine. Nothing. Just a city being a city. Old habits. They never really left. They just went quiet. Waited. She poured the coffee. Black. No sugar. Stood at the window with both hands wrapped around the mug like it was the only warm thing left in the world, and thought about her father. Thomas Calloway used to stand at windows too. She remembered that from childhood the way he'd watch the street for no reason anyone could name, the way his eyes would sweep left to right like he was counting something invisible. Cars. Exits. Threats that never came. He never talked about Desert Storm. Not really. Not the parts that mattered. What he talked about was discipline. Get up before the sun. Make your bed so tight you could bounce a coin off it. Learn to shoot straight because someday your life might depend on your hands doing what your mind already knew. Reese had been 7 years old the first time he put a rifle in her hands. An old bolt action. 22. Nothing dangerous. Nothing that could hurt more than her pride if she missed. He'd knelt behind her in the tall grass of a borrowed range outside town, adjusted her elbow, whispered into her ear like it was a secret between the two of them. Breathe out. Let it go. Squeeze. Don't pull. She'd hit the can on the first try. He hadn't smiled. He'd just nodded once, like she'd confirmed something he already suspected. That was Thomas Calloway. Not a man of praise. A man of quiet nods. Danielle got the same lessons. Older by 3 years, louder by nature, she'd taken to the discipline like it was armor she'd been waiting her whole life to put on. She joined ROTC the second she was old enough. She never looked back. Reese looked back all the time. Because somewhere between that borrowed range and this cold kitchen in Denver, her life had split into 2 versions, one that everyone could see, and one that nobody could. The coffee had gone cold in her hands. She hadn't noticed. The insurance office was exactly as gray as it sounded. Fluorescent lights that hummed just loud enough to be irritating. Carpet the color of wet cardboard. A break room that smelled permanently of burnt popcorn no matter what anyone actually microwaved. Reese sat at cubicle 14C. Entered claims data into a system that crashed twice a day like clockwork. Answered emails with subject lines like re. Urgent policy adjustment. Watched the clock hands move like they were being paid by the hour to move slowly. Her coworker, a 24-year-old named Priya, leaned over the cubicle wall around 11. You look like you're plotting a murder, Priya said. Just doing math in my head, Reese said. Which was true. Just not the kind of math Priya meant. You always do that. Stare off into space thing. It's unsettling. Sorry. Don't apologize. It's kind of a whole mood. Priya popped her gum. You coming to Marcus's birthday thing Friday? Maybe. You always say maybe. Because I always mean maybe. Priya rolled her eyes and disappeared back behind the cubicle wall, and Reese exhaled slowly through her chinos and went back to entering numbers that meant nothing into a system that would forget them by Monday. This was the life everyone saw. The life that made her mother sigh into the phone. The life that made her aunts ask, gently, terribly, every single family gathering, so Reese, honey, what are you up to these days? Like the question itself was a kindness, when really it was a scalpel. What she was up to. She thought about it sometimes alone at night, turning the question over like a stone in her palm. What would happen if she just told them? If she opened her mouth at Thanksgiving dinner, right between the mashed potatoes and the awkward silence, and said the truth? Except she couldn't, because the truth wasn't hers to give away. It belonged to something bigger than family dinners. Bigger than Carol Calloway's disappointed sighs. It belonged to people who didn't officially exist, doing work that didn't officially happen, under a name that wasn't printed on any business card Reese Calloway had ever handed anyone. Major Calloway didn't work data entry. Major Calloway hadn't touched a keyboard like this in years, except to encrypt something, except to erase something, except to build a cover story so airtight her own mother couldn't see through it. And that was the whole design, wasn't it? The vanishing act had to be flawless, Had to survive even the people who loved her most, which meant surviving Carol's disappointment, which meant surviving every Thanksgiving where Danielle got toasted and Reese got tolerated, which meant surviving a version of herself that everyone believed was real when the real one was locked somewhere they'd never find it. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Not her mother's ringtone, a different one that hadn't gone off in months. Reese's stomach dropped before her mind even processed the sound. She excused herself to the hallway, ducked into the stairwell where the cell signal was bad and the cameras were worse. Answered on the second ring. Go, a voice she hadn't heard in a long time. Male, low, careful, even over an encrypted line, because caution was a language some people never stopped speaking. Ghost, it's been a while. Reese's throat tightened at the call sign. Old, retired, technically. But some names didn't fully die, they just went dormant. Talk fast, she said. I've got 14 minutes before someone notices I'm not at my desk pretending to care about deductibles. A short laugh on the other end. Not much humor in it. Nothing operational. Not yet. Just a name came across a channel I still watch. Old business. I thought you'd want a heads up before it becomes something. Whose name? A pause that lasted 1 second too long. Not now, the voice said. Not over this line. I'll reach out through the usual channel if it turns into anything real. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got today. The line went dead. Reese stood in the stairwell for a long moment, staring at nothing. Her pulse a little too fast for a Tuesday morning spent doing insurance claims. Old business, he'd said. There was only one kind of old business that made men like that break silence after this long. And it wasn't the kind that stayed buried just because everyone wanted it to. She went back to her desk, sat down, opened the claims system again, typed numbers into boxes with hands that didn't shake, because shaking was a luxury she'd trained out of herself years ago. But underneath the stillness, something had shifted. Something old. Something waiting. Thanksgiving arrived the way it always did. Too fast and somehow also too slow. The week before it stretching out like taffy. And then suddenly there she was, standing on her parents' front porch with a store-bought pie in her hands, because baking had never been her gift, and everyone in the family knew it and let her bring the pie anyway. A small mercy dressed up as tradition. The house smelled like her childhood. Sage and butter and the particular mustiness of a home that had held the same furniture for 20 years. Her mother opened the door before she even knocked. There she is. Carol's eyes did the sweep top to bottom fast, assessing the same sweep she'd been doing since Reese was 16 and came home from parties smelling like someone else's cigarettes. You look thin. I look normal, Mom. You look thin and tired. Are you eating? I'm eating, because there's a difference between eating and surviving, Reese. And I worry you don't know the difference anymore. Reese stepped inside before she said something she'd regret. Set the pie on the counter. Hugged her father's old recliner chair with her eyes, because he wasn't in it anymore. Hadn't been in 3 years, and some part of her still expected to see him there every single time she walked through that door. The kitchen was chaos. Aunts, casseroles. A cousin's toddler shrieking with joy over nothing in particular. And then the front door opened again, and the whole house shifted its weight toward the sound like a compass, finding north. There's my girl, Danielle, 31 years old, standing in the doorway in civilian clothes that somehow still looked like a uniform because of the way she wore them, spine straight, chin level. A posture that announced itself before she said a single word. Dark hair pulled back tight. A smile that had never once needed anyone's permission to exist. The whole family descended on her like she was returning from war instead of a 2-hour drive from base. Captain Calloway, an uncle said, raising an imaginary glass. Look at you. Still just Danielle to you, Uncle Pete. Not for long. From what I hear. Danielle's eyes flicked briefly toward the kitchen. Toward Reese, standing near the counter with a pie nobody had acknowledged yet. Hey, Ree. Hey, a hug. Quick. Genuine. Even. Underneath everything, because whatever else lived between the Calloway sisters, love wasn't the missing ingredient. Just recognition. Just the specific ache of being loved less loudly. You look good, Danielle said, pulling back, studying her sister's face the way soldiers study terrain, looking for something without knowing exactly what. "You look like you're about to make an announcement," Reese said. Danielle's smile widened, and for a second the whole kitchen seemed to lean in. "Major," she said. The word dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Ants gasped. Uncle Pete actually did raise his glass this time, orange juice and all. Carol pressed both hands to her chest like she might float away from sheer pride. "They're pinning it on next Saturday," Danielle said. "Ceremony at Fort Ashworth. Colonel Whitfield's doing the honors himself." A pause, her eyes bright. "I want you all there." The kitchen exploded into noise. Congratulations stacked on congratulations. Someone started crying, the good kind of crying, the kind reserved for moments families keep in photo albums. Reese clapped, smiled, meant it, mostly the way she'd meant it on the phone with her mother 11 days earlier. Because she was proud of her sister, that part was never fake. What was harder to hold was the second feeling underneath it. The one that lived in the same chest cavity as the pride, tangled up with it so tightly she couldn't always tell where one ended and the other began. Because Danielle got a ceremony. Danielle got a room full of relatives raising glasses of orange juice like it was champagne. Danielle got to stand in a uniform everyone recognized and be exactly what she appeared to be. And Reese got insurance claims, and a pie nobody had cut into yet, and a mother who would spend all of dinner glancing sideways at her. Silently, the whole meal a masterclass in comparison, without a single word needing to be spoken aloud. "You're coming, right?" Danielle asked. Later, in the hallway, away from the noise. Voice lower now. Sister to sister instead of Captain No, major to family audience. "To the ceremony? Yeah." Reese hesitated, because going meant standing in a crowd of uniforms. Meant standing near people who might, if she wasn't careful, if she let her guard down for even half a second, recognize something in the way she carried her weight, the way her eyes swept a room on instinct before her mind caught up. Meant risking a door she'd spent 6 years keeping shut. "I don't know if I can get the time off," she said. Danielle's face did something complicated. Not hurt exactly. Something more resigned than that. "You always say that, because it's always true." "Is it, though?" Danielle folded her arms. Not accusing, just tired in a way that mirrored their mother's tiredness. The family exhaustion passed down like an heirloom. I get it. Not everyone's life looks like a highlight reel. But this is my moment, and I want my little sister there. Is that so much to ask? Reese looked at her sister's face, at the hope sitting there, plain and unguarded, the kind of hope that had no idea what it was actually asking for. Because it wasn't a request about time off work. It was a request to stand inside a building full of people trained to notice things. People trained the way Reese had been trained. People who might look at her and see, underneath the temp job cardigan and the tired eyes, something that didn't add up. "I'll try," Reese said, which was the closest thing to a promise she could safely make. Danielle studied her for one more second, then nodded, the way their father used to nod, accepting an answer without fully believing it. "Okay," she said. "I'll hold you to try." Dinner was loud and warm and exactly the kind of chaos that families like the Callaways specialized in. Turkey a little dry, gravy saving it. Carol orchestrating the table like a woman conducting an orchestra she'd been rehearsing her whole life. And underneath the noise, Reese's phone buzzed once in her pocket. She didn't check it at the table. Some rules didn't bend, not even for encrypted messages, not even for old business finally becoming new business. She checked it later. In the bathroom, door locked, water running to cover the silence. One line, no name attached. "Confirm attendance if Ashworth 11:23. Situation developing, stay alert." Reese read it twice. Her stomach turned to ice, because that was the same date, the exact same ceremony. Her sister had just begged her to attend in the hallway, hope written plain across her face. Which meant this wasn't a coincidence. Which meant something old, something Reese had buried 6 years deep was surfacing at the worst possible moment, in the worst possible place, in front of the one person on earth she'd sworn to protect from all of it. She deleted the message, splashed water on her face, stared at herself in the mirror for a long moment, at the woman everyone at that dinner table thought they knew, because there were two Reese Callaways. And in 11 days, for the first time in 6 years, they were both about to be in the same room. The days between Thanksgiving and the ceremony passed in a strange, suspended blur. Work continued, gray and forgettable. Priya invited her to Marcus's birthday thing again, and this time Reese actually went, sat in the corner of a crowded bar nursing a single beer, laughing at jokes half a beat too late, because her mind kept drifting somewhere else. Somewhere with silver oak leaves and encrypted messages, and a name that still hadn't been given to her. At night, she trained, alone in the small gym 2 blocks from her apartment, the kind of place that opened at 5 a.m. and stayed mostly empty until the after-work crowd arrived. She ran the treadmill until her lungs burned, lifted until her arms shook, not for vanity, for readiness, because old instincts didn't fade. They waited. 3 days before the ceremony, her contact called again. Same encrypted line, same careful voice. "You said stay alert," Reese said, skipping any greeting. Alert to what? A name surfaced. Someone from the old network. Someone who shouldn't still be active. Who? Another pause. Longer this time, I can't confirm yet. Could be nothing. Could be someone testing old doors to see which one's still open. A breath, static, crackling faintly. Just be careful at Ashworth. Whitfield runs a tight base, but tight doesn't mean impenetrable. Not anymore. You're telling me to watch my back at my sister's promotion ceremony. I'm telling you the world doesn't care whose sister you are. The line went dead again. Reese stood in her kitchen, the same dark, the same 4 a.m. Quiet, and felt something settle over her shoulders. Not fear, exactly. She'd trained fear out of her body a long time ago, or at least trained it into something quieter, something that lived under the skin instead of on top of it. This was different. This was the particular dread of 2 worlds colliding. Because for 6 years she'd kept them apart with surgical precision, the sister who brought store-bought pies to Thanksgiving, and the major who didn't officially exist. 2 women sharing one body, one heartbeat, one set of hands, that had learned to shoot before they'd learned to write in cursive. And now they were both walking into the same building. Fort Ashworth sat 40 minutes outside the city, low buildings and wide fields wrapped in November gray, flags snapping hard in a wind that smelled like frost and diesel. Reese arrived early. Sat in her car in the visitor lot for 6 full minutes before she made herself get out, smoothing down a blazer she'd bought specifically for this plain, dark, unremarkable, the exact opposite of anything that might draw an eye. Her mother was already inside, herding aunts and uncles toward the auditorium, like a woman who'd spent a lifetime perfecting the art of crowd control. Reese found the family in the second row, saved seats marked with folded coats. "You made it," Carol said, and for one unguarded second there was real relief in her voice. Real warmth, the kind Reese didn't get often enough to take for granted. "I said I'd try. Well, I'm glad trying worked out." Carol reached over and straightened Reese's collar, an old habit, the kind of small, motherly correction that had never once, in 28 years, fully stopped. The auditorium filled slowly. Rows of folding chairs facing a stage draped in flags, a podium at center, a row of officers seated to one side in dress uniforms that caught the overhead light like something forged rather than sewn. Reese scanned the room the way she scanned every room. Fast, automatic. Exits first 2 at the rear, 1 emergency door stage left. Then faces, uniforms. Anyone standing slightly wrong, watching slightly too long. Nothing, she exhaled. Told herself the message had been nothing. Old paranoia surfacing at the wrong moment. She'd let herself believe it, at least for the length of this ceremony. At least long enough to watch her sister get what she'd earned. The lights dimmed slightly. A hush rolled through the crowd. An officer approached the podium, silver eagles on his shoulders, face weathered in the particular way of men who'd spent decades outdoors and in briefing rooms in equal measure. Colonel Marcus Whitfield. Reese had heard the name before, in passing, in the way names sometimes drift through channels without context attached. She hadn't expected to ever see his face. Family, friends, Distinguished guests, Whitfield began, voice carrying easily across the room without a microphone's help. Today we recognize an officer who has, time and again, demonstrated the discipline, the judgment, and the quiet excellence that defines the best of what we do. Carol's hand found Reese's on the armrest between them. Squeezed once. Captain Danielle Calloway, Whitfield continued, please come forward. Danielle rose from the front row, back straight, chin level, and crossed the stage with the kind of walk that had been drilled into her over a decade of practice, measured, sure, unhurried even under 100 watching eyes. The room applauded. Carol was already crying, the good kind, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she'd clearly brought for exactly this purpose. Reese clapped along, throat tight with something that was almost entirely pride, and only a small, guilty sliver of something else. Whitfield read the citation. Years of exemplary service, leadership under pressure, a litany of accomplishments that Reese only half heard because her eyes had drifted, instinctively, toward the row of officers seated near the stage. And that was when she saw it. A man near the end of the row, mid-50s, civilian suit among the uniforms, which was itself strange enough to catch her attention. He wasn't watching Danielle. He was watching the crowd. Slow, methodical, the same kind of sweep Reese herself had done at the door. Not admiring the ceremony, cataloguing it. Her pulse ticked up, which was when Whitfield lifted the silver oak leaves from their velvet case and pinned them to Danielle's shoulders himself, and the room erupted into applause loud enough that Reese lost the man in the crowd's shifting attention, lost track of him entirely as everyone rose to their feet. Congratulations, Major Calloway, Whitfield said, extending a hand. Major Calloway. The words hit Reese sideways, not because they were new, because she'd heard almost the exact same words in an almost identical tone, applied to a version of herself that nobody in this room had ever met. The applause rolled on. Danielle turned to face the crowd, eyes finding her family immediately, finding Reese specifically, a grin breaking across her face too big to contain. And then Colonel Whitfield's eyes moved past Danielle, past the front row, scanning the crowd the way commanders learn to scan crowds, out of habit, out of a lifetime of never fully switching it off. And they stopped. On Reese. Reese felt it before she understood it the exact moment his expression changed. Not confusion, not curiosity. Recognition. Sudden, absolute, unmistakable recognition. The kind that rearranges a man's whole face in half a second. His hand, still raised from the handshake with Danielle, dropped slowly to his side. The applause was beginning to fade around them, people settling back into their seats, unaware that anything had shifted at all. Except Colonel Marcus Whitfield wasn't settling. He stepped down from the stage. Reese's whole body went rigid. Every instinct she'd trained into stillness over 6 long years screaming at once. Get out, get out, get out, except there was nowhere to go. Except her mother's hand was still wrapped around hers. Except 200 people were sitting between her every exit she'd mapped on the way in. Whitfield walked straight down the center aisle, past rows of confused faces turning to follow him, past Carol, who had gone very quiet, sensing something without yet understanding what. He stopped directly in front of Reese. The entire auditorium fell silent, that particular silence that spreads through a crowd like water, finding its level, curiosity and confusion braided together into one collective held breath. Danielle, still on stage, new oak leaves gleaming on her shoulders, stared down at the scene with her mouth slightly open. Whitfield's spine straightened, his chin lifted, and in front of every relative, every stranger, every officer in that room, he snapped to attention, raised his hand in a crisp, textbook salute. Ma'am. His voice carried, clear and unmistakable, to every corner of the silent auditorium. Why are you here? Somewhere behind her, Reese heard her mother's breath catch. Somewhere on stage, she heard Danielle whisper her name like a question that had no answer yet. And somewhere deep inside herself, in the place where 2 women had lived separately for 6 careful years, Reese Calloway felt the wall between them crack straight down the middle. She opened her mouth. No sound came out, Because there was no version of this moment she had ever trained for. No cover story fast enough. No lie small enough to fit back into the silence she'd built her entire life around. 200 faces turned toward her at once. And somewhere in the back of the room, near the exit doors, the man in the civilian suit had stopped scanning the crowd. He was looking directly at her too. The silence lasted 4 seconds. 4 seconds that felt like 4 years. Because nobody in that auditorium moved. Nobody breathed the way people normally breathe. 200 bodies frozen mid-thought, mid-gasp, mid-whatever they'd been about to say. Before Colonel Marcus Whitfield walked down that center aisle and saluted a woman in a plain dark blazer, like she was the reason the whole ceremony existed. Reese's hand was still trapped in her mother's grip. Carol's fingers had gone rigid. Not letting go. Not squeezing either. Just frozen there, locked mid-motion, the way a hand freezes when the brain hasn't caught up to what the eyes just witnessed. "Ma'am." Whitfield's voice again, lower this time, meant only for her, though half the room still heard it anyway, because sound carries in silence like that. "I wasn't told you'd be attending." Reese found her voice from somewhere very far away. "I'm not here officially, Colonel." Quiet. Controlled. The voice she'd trained for exactly this kind of collapse, except she'd never trained for it to happen in front of her own mother. "Stand down." 2 words that meant nothing to 200 civilians, and everything to one man in dress uniform. Whitfield's hand dropped from the salute. Slowly. Reluctantly. Almost like some part of him didn't want to stop. Understood. He straightened his jacket, cleared his throat, turned, finally, to address the room that was still staring at both of them like they'd sprouted second heads. "My apologies. Old habit. Please continue the reception." It wasn't an explanation. It wasn't anything close to one. But it was enough of a lifeline that the room, slowly, painfully, began to exhale. Conversations restarted in stiff, uncertain whispers. Someone laughed too loudly at nothing. The nervous kind of laugh people use to convince themselves the world hasn't tilted sideways. On stage, Danielle hadn't moved, still standing where Whitfield had left her. New oak leaves catching the light on her shoulders. Face pale under the stage lights, mouth slightly parted, eyes locked on her sister, like she was seeing a stranger wearing Reese's face. Reese, Carol's voice. Small. Smaller than Reese had ever heard it. "What is going on?" Reese looked at her mother. At the confusion sitting there, raw and unguarded, none of the usual armor Carol wore like a second skin. And for the first time in 6 years, Reese Calloway didn't have an answer ready. Because there wasn't a lie small enough anymore. Because the wall was already down. Already cracked wide open in front of 200 witnesses. Which meant there was only one thing left to do. "Not here," Reese said quietly. "Please. Not here." Whitfield found them 20 minutes later, in the chaos of the reception hall, where Sheik sat untouched on a folding table, and Carol had planted herself at Reese's elbow, like a woman guarding a wound she didn't understand yet. "Mrs. Calloway." Major Calloway. A nod to Danielle, who'd changed nothing about her posture, but everything about her eyes. "If I could borrow your family for a few minutes." "Borrow us for what?" Carol said. Not really a question. More of a demand wearing a question's clothing. "There's a room down the hall, private." Whitfield's gaze flicked briefly to Reese. Careful. Measured. A man choosing every word like it might detonate. "I think it would be better to talk there." Carol looked at Reese. Really looked at her. The way mothers look at daughters when they suspect, for the first time, that they've been looking at the wrong picture their whole lives. "Fine," Carol said. "Lead the way, Colonel." The room was small. Government beige walls, a long table, a single window with blinds drawn halfway. The kind of room built for briefings, not family conversations. And yet here they all were: Carol, Danielle, Reese, Whitfield, folding themselves into chairs, meant for people discussing operations, not decades of misunderstanding. Whitfield closed the door. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Because how do you start? Because where does a sentence like this even begin? Because Reese had run through 100 versions of this conversation in her head over 6 years, late at night, staring at ceilings, and none of them had prepared her for the particular weight of her mother's face right now, waiting, terrified, already grieving something she couldn't name. "Someone needs to explain," Carol finally said. "Right now, before I lose my mind in this room." Whitfield cleared his throat. "Ma'am, I can offer very little. What I know is limited by design, and that design isn't mine to override." He glanced at Reese. A silent question. Permission, maybe. Or an apology for what he was about to say regardless. "Say what you can," Reese said quietly. Whitfield nodded once. "Your daughter," he said, looking at Carol, "holds a rank in a unit I am not cleared to name. What I can tell you is that the rank is major." A pause. Careful. Deliberate. "Which places her above my own authority in certain contexts." Carol's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Confusion. Disbelief. Something that looked almost like anger. Except anger needs a target, and Carol didn't yet know where to aim it. "Major," she repeated. "Flat. You're telling me my daughter, the one who can't hold a job for longer than 6 months, outranks you?" "In certain contexts," Whitfield said again, gently this time. Danielle hadn't said a word since the auditorium. She sat very still, hands folded on the table, staring at her sister like she was trying to reconcile two different photographs of the same face. "How long?" Danielle said finally, voice tight. Reese swallowed. 6 years. 6 years. Danielle's jaw tightened. 6 years, Reese. I've spent 6 years feeling sorry for you, making excuses for you at family dinners, telling Mom to go easy on you because maybe you just hadn't found your thing yet." A humorless laugh escaped her, sharp and small. "And this whole time you were." She didn't finish the sentence, because she didn't have the word for it yet, because nobody in that room had the word for it yet, least of all Reese, who had spent 6 years being very good at not having words for any of this. "I couldn't tell you," Reese said. "That's not an excuse. It's just true. I wasn't allowed to tell anyone. Not you. Not Mom. Not," her voice cracked, just slightly, just enough. "Not Dad, if he'd still been here." Carol flinched at the mention of Thomas, a small, involuntary movement, the kind grief leaves behind like a scar that never fully heals. "Your father would have understood this better than any of us," Carol said quietly. "Wouldn't he?" "Maybe," Reese said. "I don't know. I never got the chance to find out." The room went quiet again. Whitfield shifted in his seat, the discomfort of a man realizing he'd walked into the middle of a family, reckoning he had no authority to referee. "I should let you three talk," he said, rising. "Major Calloway," he nodded to Reese, and something in the gesture was almost apologetic, almost reverent. "My office knows how to reach me, should you need anything." He left. The door clicked shut behind him, and then it was just the three of them. Mother, sister, and the woman they'd both spent 6 years misunderstanding completely. "Start from the beginning," Carol said. "I want the beginning, Reese. Not the parts you're allowed to give me. The real beginning." Reese looked at her hands. Because the beginning wasn't a place she visited often. She kept it sealed away. She kept everything sealed, filed away, labeled, locked behind a door in her mind that only opened under exactly the right pressure. This was exactly the right pressure. "It started when I was 22, Reese said slowly. "Right after I left that internship in DC, the one I told you fell through." "It didn't fall through," Carol said, understanding dawning cold and sudden. "No," Reese said, "it didn't." She'd been 22 years old, standing on a shooting range outside Quantico that wasn't supposed to exist on any public map, invited there by a man she'd met exactly once, at a range back home, the same range her father used to take her to as a child. The man's name was Colonel Elias Grant. Retired now, dead now, actually a heart attack 4 years back, quiet and undignified for a man who'd spent his whole life being neither. But back then he'd been sharp-eyed and unreadable, watching a 22-year-old Reese put 5 rounds through a target at 400 yards with a rifle she'd never fired before in her life. "Your father taught you that," Grant had said. Not a question. "My father taught me everything," Reese had answered, which was truer than she'd known at the time. Grant had studied her for a long moment, the kind of look that measured something beyond what a target sheet could show. How would you feel, he'd said, about disappearing for a while? She should have laughed. Should have thought it was a joke, a strange one, delivered by a strange old man on a strange range in the middle of nowhere. Except something in his voice told her it wasn't a joke at all. Disappearing where, she'd asked. Into something that matters, Grant had said. Into work that will never make your family proud in the ways they expect. That will, in fact, make them believe the opposite. That you're aimless, unfocused, a disappointment. He'd let that word sit there, deliberately cruel, testing her reaction. Can you carry that? Can you let people you love believe a lie about you for years without breaking? Reese had thought about her mother, about the particular sigh Carol made when disappointed, the one that always landed just beneath the ribs, and she'd thought about her father, about the quiet nod he'd given her at 7 years old, the first time she'd hit that target dead center, about the thing he never said out loud, but always seemed to mean that some kinds of value don't need applause to be real. Yes, she'd said, I can carry that. She hadn't known then exactly how heavy it would get. So that's it, Reese said, back in the beige room, back in the present, her mother's face pale across the table. That's how it started. A recruitment I couldn't refuse and couldn't explain. Training that erased 6 months from my life that I told you was a study abroad program in Prague. The Prague thing, Carol said faintly. I have photos of you in Prague. Staged, Reese said. Quiet. Almost apologetic. I'm sorry, Mom. I really am. But the whole thing only works if it's airtight, if even the photos hold up. Danielle was staring at the table now, jaw working, processing something that clearly had more than one layer to it. 6 months of training, Danielle said. For what, exactly? What do you even do, Reese? What's the actual job? Reese hesitated, because there was a version of the truth she could give, and a version she couldn't, and the line between them was drawn somewhere she didn't fully control. Intelligence work, she said carefully. Field operations sometimes. Under a unit designation I'm not able to name. What I can tell you is that it's real, that it matters, and that everything you've believed about me for the last 6 years, the jobs I couldn't hold, the apartments I kept changing, the trips I couldn't explain, all of it was cover. All of it was built, on purpose, so that this exact conversation would never have to happen. Except it's happening, Carol said, voice tight. Except it's happening, Reese agreed, because Colonel Whitfield saw my face and forgot, for 1 second, that I wasn't supposed to exist in this building. Carol pressed both hands flat against the table, steadying herself, or steadying the room maybe, which felt like it was tilting slightly beneath all 3 of them. All those years, Carol said slowly, all those years I told people my daughter was. She stopped, swallowed hard. I told your Aunt Linda you were lost. That's the word I used. Lost, I know. I told her I didn't know what I did wrong raising you. Something in Reese's chest cracked wide open at that, because she'd imagined this conversation 100 different ways over 6 years. And in none of those imagined versions had she pictured her mother's voice breaking quite like this. You didn't do anything wrong, Reese said. Mom, look at me. You didn't do anything wrong. Carol's eyes were wet now, bright and furious and grieving all at once. Then why did you let me believe you had? Carol said. Why did you let me spend years apologizing to strangers for the daughter I thought I'd failed? Reese didn't have an answer that would fix that, because there wasn't one. Because some kinds of sacrifice don't come with clean edges, don't resolve neatly, don't undo the damage, just because the truth finally arrives. Because the alternative was worse, Reese said quietly. Because if I'd told you, even once, even by accident, it wouldn't have just put me at risk. It would have put you at risk. Both of you. Her eyes moved to Danielle. Everyone I love became a liability the moment I said yes to this. So I built a wall. And I know now that the wall hurt you. I know that. But the wall was never about not loving you enough. Silence stretched across the table. Danielle spoke first, quietly, almost to herself. 8 months, she said. Reese's stomach dropped, because she knew exactly which 8 months her sister meant. She'd been 25 years old, 3 years into the work by then, deployed under a cover identity so deep, even she sometimes forgot. for hours at a stretch, that her real name was Reese Calloway, and not the name stitched into the false passport tucked inside a lining. Nobody would think to search. The operation had gone wrong in the particular, catastrophic way operations go wrong, not all at once, but in pieces, each piece small enough to survive until the pieces added up to something unsurvivable. She remembered fragments: a safe house that stopped being safe, a radio that went silent at the exact moment. Silence meant something had gone terribly wrong. Running, actual running, the kind that strips a person down to animal instinct, lungs burning, mind empty of everything except the next step and the one after that, and then pain, a different kind of silence after that. White walls, a ceiling she stared at for what felt like weeks without knowing for certain whether it had actually been weeks or days or some formless stretch of time that didn't obey normal rules anymore. A military hospital, though not one that appeared on any public registry. Doctors who didn't use her real name, because using it would have meant admitting she was there at all, and admitting she was there at all would have meant admitting the whole operation existed, and the whole operation existing was, itself, classified beyond anything Reese was clear to fully understand, even from inside it. No calls allowed, no letters, no contact of any kind, for security reasons that had been explained to her in clipped clinical language by a man in a suit who'd sat beside her hospital bed exactly once and never returned. 8 months. 8 months during which, back home, a family had slowly convinced itself their youngest daughter had simply run away, had cut them off out of some unnamed rebellion, had chosen, deliberately, cruelly, to disappear. Reese hadn't known any of that until much later. Hadn't known about the missing persons report Carol filed and then quietly withdrew after 2 weeks' mises, embarrassed, convinced her daughter was fine and simply avoiding them on purpose. Hadn't known about the nights Danielle spent calling old friends from Reese college years, asking careful, worried questions, getting nowhere. She hadn't known, until she was finally cleared to reach out again, that her own mother had spent those 8 months believing her daughter had abandoned the family entirely. "I called you," Reese said now, quietly, across the beige table, "the day I was cleared to make contact again. Do you remember what I said?" Carol's eyes were distant, remembering. "You said you needed space," Carol said. "You said you'd been going through something and you needed space, and you were sorry for worrying us." "That was the cover story," Reese said. "The real story was that I'd been shot. Twice. That I'd spent 3 of those 8 months in a coma the doctors weren't sure I'd wake up from. That when I finally did wake up, the first thing I asked wasn't where I was, or what had happened to me. It was whether my family was okay, whether you were okay." Carol's hand came up to cover her mouth. Danielle had gone very pale. "You were shot," Danielle said, barely a whisper. "And we thought you'd run away. We thought, Reese, I told people you were being selfish. I told people that you didn't know. That doesn't make it okay." Danielle's voice cracked, finally, the composure she'd carried like armor, her whole life splitting right down the seam. "I'm your sister. I should have known something was wrong. I should have felt it. Somehow, I don't know. Isn't that supposed to be a thing? Twins feel it, don't they? Shouldn't sisters feel something too?" "We're not twins," Reese said gently. "And even if we were Danielle, the whole point was that nobody could feel it. That's what made the cover work. That's what kept you safe." "Safe from what?" Danielle's voice rose now, sharp with 6 years of buried resentment, suddenly finding an outlet. "Safe from worrying about you? Because I worried about you anyway, Reese. I worried about you constantly. I just worried about the wrong things. I worried you were throwing your life away on nothing, when the truth is, you were out there bleeding for something, and I was standing in a kitchen telling relatives my sister needed to grow up." The words hung in the room like smoke. Reese felt them land, felt each one settle into a place that had been waiting, quietly, for exactly this kind of impact for 6 long years. "I'm sorry," Reese said. It felt small, insufficient. The only thing she had. "I know it doesn't undo any of it, but I am sorry. For all of it. For every dinner you had to defend me at. Every assumption you had to correct on my behalf. Every time you thought less of me because the story I let you believe made it impossible to think anything else. Carol was crying now. Not loudly, just steady, quiet tears, the kind that come from somewhere very deep and very old. All those years, Carol said again, softer this time. I compared you to your sister at every holiday, every single one. I made you sit through it. I made you feel like you were less than her, when the whole time, Mom, when the whole time you were the one bleeding out in some hospital I wasn't allowed to know about. Mom, stop. I don't know how to stop. Carol's voice broke completely now. I don't know how to just undo 6 years of thinking my daughter was lost, Reese. I don't know how to hold both things at once. That you're this person, this major, this woman who apparently gets saluted by colonels, and also still my baby girl, who I made feel like nothing, over and over, at every single family dinner. Reese reached across the table, took her mother's hand, the same hand that had frozen in the auditorium 20 minutes earlier, unable to process what was happening. You don't have to figure it out today, Reese said. You just have to know right now, in this room, none of it was your fault. Not the missing years. Not the comparisons. I chose this. I chose to let you believe what you believed, because the alternative put everyone I love in danger. That choice was mine. The guilt isn't yours to carry. Carol squeezed her hand. Tight. Like she was trying to make up in one gesture for 6 years of not knowing what to hold on to. Danielle sat quietly for a long moment, staring at her own hands. Then slowly she reached across the table too, laid her hand over both of theirs. For what it's worth, Danielle said, voice rough, I'm proud of you. I don't even know what you actually do. Not really. Not the details. But I'm proud of you. And I'm furious. Both things, at the same time. Is that allowed? A small, broken laugh escaped Reese. The first real one in what felt like hours. Yeah, she said. That's allowed. The drive home was quiet in a different way than the drive there had been. Carol sat in the passenger seat of Danielle's car, staring out the window at fields turning gray under a low November sky, and said very little for the first 20 minutes. Reese sat in the back, watching the back of her mother's head, waiting for something, anger maybe, or another round of grief to surface. Instead, when Carol finally spoke, her voice was small and strange. Your father knew, didn't he? Reese's chest tightened. No, he didn't. He passed before I was ever cleared to tell anyone. But he would have understood, Carol said. Wouldn't he? The waiting, the not knowing. The way you have to just trust that someone you love is doing something important, even when it looks like nothing from the outside. I think he would have understood better than anyone, Reese said quietly. He lived some version of it himself once. He just never talked about the parts that mattered. Carol was quiet for a long moment. I used to get so angry at him for that, she said finally. For all the silences, all the things he wouldn't explain. I thought it meant he didn't trust me enough to let me in. A small, broken exhale. Now I wonder if it just meant he was trying to protect me, the way you were trying to protect us. Maybe both things were true, Reese said. Maybe that's just what love looks like sometimes in families like ours. Silence that isn't distance, it's armor. Danielle, driving, kept her eyes on the road, but her jaw was tight, working through something private. I keep thinking about all the times I complained about you at dinner, she said. To Mom, to Aunt Linda, to literally anyone who'd listen. Why can't Reese just figure her life out? God, I sound like such an... You didn't know, Reese said again. You can't blame yourself for a story I built specifically so you wouldn't know. Doesn't make it feel any less awful, Danielle said. Sitting there in my dress uniform getting toasted, like I'm the only daughter who ever accomplished anything, while my actual little sister was out there doing whatever it is you actually do, bleeding for it, nearly dying for it, and getting nothing for it. No parade, no toast, no oak leaves pinned on your shoulder in front of a room full of people who love you. I don't need the toast, Reese said, and meant it mostly. I never did it for the toast, I know, Danielle said. That's exactly what makes it worse. They didn't talk about it again that night. Some things need space to breathe before they can be picked up and examined further. And the Calloway women, all 3 of them understood That instinctively, the way families sometimes understand things without ever discussing the rules out loud. Carol made tea nobody drank. Danielle sat on the couch, scrolling through her phone without really seeing it. Reese stood at the window of her childhood home, the same window her father used to stand at, watching a dark street that held no threats at all, out of habit more than necessity. "Stay tonight," Carol said, eventually, from the kitchen doorway. "Please. I don't think I can handle you disappearing back to your apartment after a day like today." Reese turned, looked at her mother's face, softer now than she'd seen it in years, worn thin by grief and relief tangled together in a way that made her look, suddenly, much older. "Okay," Reese said. "I'll stay." She slept in her childhood bedroom that night, in a bed too small for her adult body, under a ceiling she'd stared at as a teenager, dreaming about a future that never once, not in any version, looked like this. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, it came shallow and uneasy, the kind of sleep that keeps one ear listening even in dreams. The weeks that followed had a strange, tender quality to them, like a bone that had been broken and reset, still tender at the edges, but healing in a direction that finally made sense. Carol called more often. Different calls now, not the clipped, disappointed check-ins of before, but longer conversations, hesitant at first, then steadier, as if she were relearning how to talk to a daughter she'd misunderstood for 6 years. "I told your Aunt Linda the truth," Carol said, on one such call, roughly 2 weeks after the ceremony. "Well, as much truth as I'm allowed to tell, which apparently isn't much. I just said you'd been doing important work, classified work, that I'd misjudged you." "How'd she take it?" she cried, Carol said. "Then she asked if you could get her tickets to the Pentagon gift shop." A short laugh. "Some things don't change." Reese laughed, too, real and warm, sitting in her small apartment, with her coffee going cold in her hand, the way it always did. "I owe you an apology, too," Carol added, quieter now. "Not just for the years of comparing you to your sister, for not asking harder questions, for accepting the easy story because the easy story required less of me." "Mom, you don't have to." "I do, though," Carol said firmly. "Let me have this, Reese. Let me say it. I'm sorry. I should have pushed harder. I should have trusted, somewhere deep down, that the daughter who learned to shoot straight at 7 years old and never once complained about the discipline. Your father demanded that daughter didn't just vanish into nothing. I let the surface story win because it was simpler than believing in you." Reese closed her eyes. Let the words settle somewhere important. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means more than you know." Danielle's calls were different, rougher around the edges, still working through something. "I looked you up," Danielle said, one evening in early December, her voice carrying that particular edge of someone who spent hours doing something they probably shouldn't have. Reese's stomach tightened. "Looked me up where?" "Relax. I didn't hack into anything classified." A dry laugh. I asked around, carefully. People who might know people. Nobody would confirm anything, obviously. But one guy, an old instructor from my officer training, got a weird look on his face when I mentioned your name. Like he recognized it from somewhere he wasn't supposed to, Danielle. "I'm not trying to blow your cover," Danielle said quickly. I needed to understand, even a little, even just enough to stop imagining the worst version of what you might have gone through." Reese was quiet for a moment. "What did he say?" she asked finally. "The instructor. Nothing, really. Just that look. And then he changed the subject so fast I thought I'd committed a felony just by asking." A pause. "But it told me something, Ree. It told me that whatever you've done, whoever you've become, under all those cover stories, it's real enough. That grown men with combat experience get nervous just hearing your name in passing." Something in Reese's chest tightened at that. Not pride, exactly. Something more complicated. The particular ache of being seen, finally, by someone who mattered. "I'm still your sister," Reese said quietly. "Underneath all of it. That part was never fake." "I know," Danielle said. "That's the part I keep coming back to. That you were carrying all of this whole other life, and you still showed up at every birthday you could manage. still remembered my coffee order, still asked about my ex-boyfriends even though you clearly had bigger things happening in your world than my terrible taste in men. A small, wet laugh. You were still you, Reese. The whole time. I just didn't know how much more there was to you. But healing, real healing, rarely moves in a straight line. And the peace the Calloway family had begun building, fragile as new frost, was about to be tested in a way none of them could have predicted. It started small. The way most catastrophic things start small, unnoticed. A single loose thread that hasn't yet begun to unravel the whole garment. Reese was 3 weeks back into her cover job, the insurance office. The gray carpet, the fluorescent hum when the encrypted line buzzed again, this time not from her old contact, but from a number she didn't recognize at all, routed through channels that told her, before she even answered, that this wasn't a social call. She took it in the stairwell. Same stairwell as before, same bad cell signal, same worse cameras. "This is Ghost," she said, using the old call sign out of instinct, a voice she didn't know. Clipped, professional, tense in a way that made her stomach drop before a single meaningful word had been spoken. "Major Calloway, this is Directorate 9 Operations. We need to speak with you regarding a matter involving your sister's unit." Reese's whole body went cold. "What matter?" she said. Her voice came out flatter than she felt. "There's an active intelligence concern regarding the 127th Ranger Support Battalion's upcoming joint training deployment. We believe operational details may have been compromised." Compromised how? A pause. The kind of pause that carries bad news inside it before the words even arrive. "We're not certain yet. That's what we need you for." Reese closed her eyes, pressed her back against the cold concrete wall of the stairwell, the same wall she'd leaned against weeks earlier, when old business first came calling, because there it was. The thing her contact had warned her about, weeks ago, in careful, coded half-sentences. Old business becoming new business. A name surfacing from channels that should have stayed quiet. Except now it wasn't abstract anymore. Now it had a shape, a specific unit, a specific deployment, a specific sister who had no idea, standing somewhere on base right now in her new oak leaves, that something dangerous might already be moving toward her. "Send me everything you have," Reese said. "Now." "Copy that, Major." Transmitting secure file in 5 minutes. The line went dead. Reese stood alone in the stairwell for a long moment, staring at nothing, feeling the ground shift beneath a peace she'd only just begun to trust. Because 6 years of careful separation of two lives, kept surgically apart, had just collided in the worst possible way. The world she'd hidden from her family had reached out and found her sister anyway. The file arrived exactly on schedule, encrypted 3 layers deep, requiring a sequence of authentications Reese hadn't used in months. She read it standing in a bathroom stall on her lunch break, thumb trembling slightly against the screen in a way she hadn't allowed her hands to tremble in years. The details were sparse. Deliberately so need-to-know compartmentalization, even within an active threat assessment. But sparse didn't mean small. A joint training deployment. Danielle's unit, moving to a remote training area 2 weeks out, coordinates and timing that should have existed in exactly 3 secured systems and nowhere else. Except a fragment of that information had surfaced somewhere it shouldn't have. A whisper in a channel Directorate 9 monitored specifically, because whispers in that channel had historically preceded very bad things. Not confirmed, not yet actionable, but present, a shadow where there should have been nothing at all. Reese read the file 3 times, memorized what needed memorizing, then deleted it according to protocol, watching the screen wipe itself clean of information that might determine whether her sister came home safely from a training exercise that was supposed to be routine. Routine. The word sat wrong in her chest, because nothing about this felt routine anymore. She thought about calling Danielle right then, warning her, somehow, in whatever vague, careful language wouldn't violate a dozen different security protocols. Except warnings without specifics were often worse than no warning at all. Except panic without direction gets people killed just as easily as ignorance does. Except the whole denizen of this work, the whole reason, 6 years of silence, had ever made sense, was built on the principle that some information could only be handled by people trained to carry it. So instead, Reese did what she'd trained to do. She went to work. The investigation moved slowly, the way real intelligence work almost always does. Nothing like the compressed urgency of the movies her mother sometimes watched on Sunday afternoons. Days of quiet digging, cross-referencing, following threads that led nowhere, then threads that led somewhere, then threads that led back to nowhere again. Reese requested emergency reassignment from Directorate 9, citing personal connection to the threatened unit, a request that, under normal circumstances, might have been denied outright. Conflicts of interest existed for good reasons. Objectivity mattered. A major with a sister in the crosshairs was not on paper the ideal choice to run point on an investigation this sensitive. But Colonel Whitfield, it turned out, had submitted his own quiet request. A recommendation, carefully worded, that Major Calloway's unique position, insider knowledge of the unit's structure, personal stake in the outcome, proven field record, made her the most effective choice available, personal complications notwithstanding. The approval came through 2 days later. Reese requested emergency leave from her cover job, told Priya and the office manager vaguely that a family emergency had come up, which wasn't entirely a lie, which was, in fact, the truest thing she'd said to anyone in that gray office in 6 years. She spent the following week in a secure facility, 40 minutes from the city, in a room with no windows, surrounded by monitors and analysts, and the particular exhausted intensity of people racing against a clock nobody could see but everyone could feel. The picture assembled slowly. A pattern of small, seemingly unconnected data points, a delayed transmission here, an unusual access log there, a communication routed through a channel that shouldn't have carried this particular traffic at all. None of it, on its own, meant anything definitive. Together, it meant something was very wrong. Someone with legitimate access is moving information they shouldn't be moving, Reese said, 3 days into the investigation, standing in front of a wall of data with an analyst named Okafor who'd been assigned to work alongside her. This isn't an outside breach. This is someone inside the system. Which narrows the list, Okafor said, though his tone made clear how little comfort that narrowing actually provided. Still a lot of people with legitimate access to joint deployment logistics, Major. Command staff, liaison officers, support personnel with clearance. Reese stared at the wall, at the tangled web of access logs and timestamps that hid somewhere inside it, the shape of a betrayal she hadn't yet learned to see clearly. Then we keep narrowing, she said. The nights during that week blurred together, sleep grabbed in short, uneasy stretches on a cot in a back room, the kind of sleep that leaves a person more tired than not sleeping at all. Reese ate when someone put food in front of her, drank coffee that had long since stopped tasting like anything. She called her mother twice during that stretch, brief calls, careful not to reveal the specifics of what had swallowed her days whole. "You sound exhausted," Carol said, the second call, worry threading through her voice, in a way that would have been impossible 6 years ago, back when exhaustion in Reese's voice would have been met with a sigh about poor life choices, instead of genuine concern. "Work thing," Reese said, which was again truer than it sounded. "I'm okay, Mom, I promise." "Is it?" Carol hesitated. "Is it dangerous, what you're doing right now?" Reese looked at the wall of data in front of her, at the shape of a threat still not fully visible, still hiding somewhere in the noise. "I don't know yet," she said honestly. "I'll tell you what I can, when I can." Carol was quiet for a moment. "Your sister called me yesterday. She said training's been moved up. Something about accelerated timelines." A pause, worry sharpening into something more specific. "Reese, does this have anything to do with Danielle?" Reese closed her eyes. Because lying to her mother had once been second nature, a survival skill honed over 6 careful years. And now, standing in a secure facility with her sister's safety hanging somewhere in the balance of an investigation she couldn't fully explain, lying felt like the cruelest thing she could possibly do. "I can't tell you the details," Reese said slowly. "But yes, it might. Carol's breath caught audibly on the other end of the line. Might how, Reese? Might how? I need you to trust me, Reese said. The way you're learning to. I need you to let me do my job, and I need you to not call Danielle and alarm her with half information that could make things worse instead of better. Can you do that? Can you trust me with this? The silence stretched long enough that Reese thought the call might have dropped. Yes, Carol said finally, voice thin but steady. I trust you. Just bring your sister home safe, Reese. Whatever this is, whatever you need to do, bring her home. I will, Reese said, and meant it with everything she had, even as some cold, honest part of her mind refused to promise anything the world hadn't yet agreed to. The break came on the 5th day, in the way breaks often come in this line of work, not through some dramatic revelation, but through the quiet, unglamorous grind of cross-referencing patterns until one pattern finally stopped hiding. An access log, a name that shouldn't have needed to touch this particular set of deployment files, but had, twice, at odd hours, under a justification that looked plausible on the surface, and increasingly strange the longer Reese stared at it. Foster Bragg. The name meant nothing to Reese at first. A liaison officer, mid-level, working logistics between command staff and outside training coordinators. A face she didn't recognize from a file photo that looked unremarkable, in every way gray at the temples, tired, the kind of face that blended into 100 other faces in 100 other briefing rooms. Except something about the name snagged at the edge of her memory. Small, distant. The kind of recognition that takes a moment to surface, because it belongs to a different context entirely, a different room, a different version of her life. She pulled up personnel records, cross-referenced service history, and found it. Foster Bragg, retired Army logistics officer, now working as a civilian liaison under contract, 28 years of service before retirement, stationed at various points across a long career, at bases up and down the East Coast, including 29 years ago, a base where a young officer named Thomas Calloway had once served. Reese's blood went cold, because she remembered the name now, remembered it from childhood, faint and half-formed, a voice on the phone, sometimes when she was young, a name her father spoke, with the particular warmth reserved for men who'd shared something significant together, something that mattered more than rank or assignment. Uncle Foster. Not blood family, never blood family, but close enough, familiar enough, present enough, at just the right moments over the years. A phone call after her father's funeral, a card at Christmas some years, a name that occupied the specific, trusted space reserved for the people closest to a family without technically belonging to it. Reese sat very still, staring at the file photo, at the tired, unremarkable face of a man who had once knelt beside her mother at her father's graveside and promised, in a voice thick with genuine grief, that Thomas would never be forgotten. Major? Okafor's voice, careful, noticing something shift in her expression. You know this name? Reese's throat had gone tight. Yes, she said quietly. I know him. Personal connection? Reese thought about her mother's voice on the phone, thick with grief, thanking Foster Bragg for coming to the funeral when so many others hadn't. Thought about her father's rare, warm laugh whenever Foster's name came up in conversation. The particular ease between two men who'd trusted each other with something dangerous. Once, a long time ago. Family friend, Reese said. Close family friend. For almost 30 years. Okafor's expression didn't change, professional to the last, but something in the room's temperature shifted anyway. Because everyone in that room understood, without needing it explained, exactly how much harder this had just become. We need more before we move on him, Okafor said carefully. 2 anomalous access instances isn't proof of anything. Could be an innocent mistake. Could be nothing at all. It's not nothing, Reese said, though some desperate part of her wanted it to be exactly that. Wanted this whole thread to unravel into coincidence, into a clerical error, into anything except what her gut was already telling her it might be. Then we build the case properly, Okafor said, carefully. Because if you're right, Major, if this really is the man you think it is, you're going to need every piece locked down before you confront him. Not just for the investigation's sake. Reese looked at him, understood exactly what he wasn't saying out loud. Not just for the investigation's sake. For her own sake. For her family's sake. Because confronting a man who'd stood beside her mother at her father's grave accusing him publicly of betraying the very unit that carried her sister's life inside it was not a thing that could be undone if she got it wrong. Understood, Reese said. We build it properly. The next 4 days moved with a grinding, methodical intensity that left Reese hollowed out by the time real evidence finally began to surface. Financial records, obtained through channels that required signatures and justifications, stacked 3 deep. Communication patterns, a second access log, then a third, each one tightening the noose around a name Reese had known her entire life as something safe. The financial picture, when it finally emerged, told its own quiet, devastating story. Foster Bragg, it turned out, had spent the last 18 months slowly, steadily drowning. Debts accumulated through a son's failed business venture. A second mortgage taken out and burned through within months. A pattern of financial desperation that painted a man backed into a corner long before any of this had started. And then, buried in a communication log flagged by an automated system 3 days earlier, the piece that turned suspicion into something closer to certainty. An encrypted exchange, routed through a series of relay points designed to obscure origin and destination alike, between an account linked to Foster Bragg's personal devices and an entity Directorate 9's systems had flagged, months earlier, under a designation that made even the analysts in that windowless room go quiet when it appeared on screen. The ledger, a name Reese had heard before, in briefings, in warnings, in the careful, worried tone intelligence officers used when discussing networks too large and too well insulated to fully map. A domestic network dealing in stolen military hardware, classified information, access sold to the highest bidder, regardless of what that access might eventually cost. They don't usually recruit, Okafor said, staring at the screen, voice quiet. Not directly. They find people already drowning. People who'll say yes because saying no feels impossible. Reese thought about Foster Bragg's face at her father's funeral. About the particular gentleness in his voice when he'd told her, 25 years old and grieving, that her father had been the finest man he'd ever served beside. He didn't start this, Reese said slowly. Something started it for him. Debt, desperation. Somebody found the crack and pushed. Doesn't change what it means for your sister's unit, Okafor said, not unkindly. Just honest, the way this work demanded honesty even when honesty hurt. I know, Reese said. She stared at the screen a moment longer, at the tangled evidence of a good man's slow collapse into something dangerous, and felt something harden in her chest, cold and clear, and absolutely certain. Then we stop it, she said, before it costs my sister anything at all. But the world, as it so often does, moved faster than the careful, methodical process of building an airtight case. It happened on a Tuesday, an ordinary word for an ordinary day that would, by nightfall, become anything but. Reese was in the secure facility, cross-referencing the last pieces of financial evidence with Okafor at her side, when an alert flashed across the main operations screen, the kind of alert that silences a room instantly, every analyst's head snapping up at once, every conversation dying mid-sentence. Flash traffic 127th Ranger Support, battalion training convoy status, unknown. Reese's whole body went rigid. What does that mean? She said, though some cold, certain part of her already knew exactly what it meant, had known it was coming from the moment she'd first read Foster Bragg's name off an access log 5 days earlier. Status unknown. What does that mean? Okafor was already pulling up secondary feeds, hands moving fast across the keyboard, his professional calm cracking just slightly at the edges. Training convoy went dark during transit to the exercise site, he said. Scheduled check-in at 1400 didn't happen. Second attempt at 1415. Nothing. Commands treating it as a communications failure until proven otherwise. But you don't think it's a communications failure, Reese said. Her voice had gone very quiet. very still. The particular stillness that lives just before panic, holding it back by sheer force of will. Okafor looked at her, and for the first time in 5 days of careful, professional distance, something like genuine fear passed across his face. Given what we found on Bragg, he said slowly, given the timeline he had access to, given exactly which convoy went dark, and exactly when no, Major, I don't think it's a communications failure. Reese was already moving, already pulling up every channel she had clearance to access, every feed, every scrap of information that might tell her whether the sister she'd spent 6 years protecting from a truth too dangerous to share was, at this exact moment, safe. "Get me Whitfield," she said, voice sharp now, cutting through the room like a blade. "Get me anyone with eyes on that convoy's last known position. Now." The room exploded into motion around her, analysts reaching for phones, secure lines lighting up across the facility, the particular controlled chaos of an operation shifting, in an instant, from investigation to crisis. Reese stood at the center of it, hands gripping the edge of the console in front of her, staring at a map on the main screen where a small blinking icon, her sister's convoy, reduced to a single dot of light, had stopped moving entirely. No new position, no signal, no confirmation of anything except silence. Her mind flashed unbidden to the beige room 3 weeks earlier, to Danielle's voice, rough with 6 years of buried resentment, saying I should have felt it, somehow. Shouldn't sisters feel something too? Reese hadn't felt anything, hadn't known, until this exact moment, standing in a windowless room 40 minutes outside the city, that somewhere out there, her sister's convoy had gone dark on a training route that should have been routine, should have been safe, should have been nothing more than a formality on the way to an exercise nobody was supposed to remember by Christmas. "Major," Okafor's voice, careful, urgent, "we have a partial signal." Scrambled. "Coming through now." Reese's heart slammed against her ribs. "Put it through," she said. Now static filled the room first, then fragments of a voice, broken, distorted, barely holding together across a connection, stretched to its absolute limit. "Ambush, multiple casualties, need immediate." The signal cut out entirely. The room went dead silent. Reese stared at the blinking dot on the screen, unmoving now, frozen at the exact coordinates where her sister's convoy had last reported in, and felt 6 years of careful, surgical separation between 2 lives collapse, all at once, into a single, terrifying truth. Danielle was out there, somewhere in the dark, somewhere beyond the reach of any signal Reese could currently access. And the man responsible for the silence that had swallowed her, the man who'd handed away the exact coordinates that made this ambush possible, had stood beside their mother at their father's grave and promised in a voice thick with grief that Thomas Calloway would never be forgotten. Reese closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Let the fear move through her, fast and total, the way she'd trained herself to let fear move through without letting it stay. Then she opened them again, and the woman who looked out from behind them was no longer the sister who'd stood frozen in an auditorium 3 weeks ago, no longer the daughter who'd sat quietly through years of comparison at family dinners. She was Major Calloway, Ghost 6, to the people who still whispered that name in channels most people never heard, and she was about to do whatever it took to bring her sister home. "Get me a line to Whitfield," she said, voice steady now, carved from something harder than fear, "and pull every available asset within 200 miles of that convoy's last known position." Okafor stared at her for half a second, something like awe flickering behind the professional urgency in his eyes. "Yes, Major," he said. "Right away." The room moved around her, fast and focused, machinery of an entire intelligence apparatus grinding into motion. And Reese Calloway stood at the center of it, staring at a frozen dot of light on a screen, and made herself a promise that no cover story, no careful lie, no 6 years of practiced silence would ever stand between her and getting her sister out of whatever darkness had just swallowed her whole. The map didn't move. That was the worst part. Not the static, not the broken voice that had come through the line and vanished. The stillness of that single blinking dot, frozen at coordinates that meant nothing to anyone in this room, except that they marked the last known place her sister had been alive. Because a dot that stops moving could mean radio failure, or it could mean the convoy itself had stopped moving, which was a different kind of silence entirely. Reese stood at the console with both hands braced against the edge of it, knuckles pale, breathing in the 4-count rhythm she'd trained into her body a decade ago. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. Because panic was a luxury she'd stopped affording herself the moment she said yes to a stranger on a shooting range 6 years ago. And she wasn't about to start affording it now, not with Danielle's life sitting somewhere inside that frozen dot. Whitfield's on secure line 2, Okafor said, sliding a headset toward her without looking up from his own screen. 3 others opened beside it, satellite feeds and comm logs scrolling too fast for anyone but a trained eye to follow. Reese took the headset. Didn't sit. Couldn't sit. Colonel. Major Calloway. Whitfield's voice, tight and controlled, the voice of a man holding a great deal of fear very still behind rank and procedure. I assume you've seen what I'm seeing. I've seen a dead dot on a map and a partial transmission mentioning an ambush and multiple casualties, Reese said. I need more than that, Colonel. I need eyes. We're working on it. Nearest QRF is 40 minutes out by ground. Air support's being scrambled, but weather's a factor, ceilings dropping fast over that ridge line. 40 minutes. Reese's stomach dropped through the floor, because 40 minutes was an eternity when the last thing anyone had heard was a voice screaming about casualties. 40 minutes was the difference between a rescue and a recovery, and every second she stood here doing math instead of moving was a second that math got worse. Not good enough, she said. I'm aware of that, Major. I'm working every asset I have. Then work them faster. Her voice cracked, just slightly, on the last word, and she hated it. Hated that, even now, even trained the way she was. Some raw and unguarded piece of her kept slipping through the cracks whenever Danielle's name entered the equation. Colonel, that's my sister out there. A pause on the line, heavy, human. I know exactly whose sister she is, Major, Whitfield said, quieter now, which is why I need you to help me get this right, instead of getting it fast and wrong. Reese closed her eyes. Because he was correct, and being correct didn't make it easier to hear. And some part of her wanted to reach through the phone line and shake him until faster became the only word either of them cared about anymore. What do you need from me? She said instead. Because that was the only useful question left. Because falling apart wouldn't move that QRF 1 mile faster, wouldn't clear that ridge line of weather, wouldn't put a single boot closer to her sister's last known position. I need Directorate 9's red on this, Whitfield said. You flagged an internal compromise 5 days ago. If this ambush connects to that compromise, I need to know who knew that convoy's route. I need to know it before I send more people into a kill box someone built on purpose. Reese's jaw tightened, because she already had a name. Had carried it for 5 days like a stone in her pocket, turning it over and over, hoping foolishly, desperately, that it would somehow turn into something else the longer she held it. Foster Bragg, she said. Silence on the line. Say that again, Whitfield said slowly. Foster Bragg, liaison officer, civilian contract, logistic coordination for your unit's joint training deployments. He's had 2 anomalous accesses to convoy routing data in the last month. We traced a financial trail debt, desperation, a connection to a domestic network called the Ledger that deals in exactly this kind of access. Bragg, Whitfield repeated, and something in his voice had gone cold and strange. I've had dinner with that man's family, Major. So has mine, Reese said. Quiet, flat, the particular flatness of a person holding something too heavy to let show on their voice. He was at my father's funeral, Colonel. He held my mother's hand at the graveside. The line went quiet again, longer this time. Then God help him, Whitfield said finally, because if that convoy went dark because of information he sold, there won't be a rank high enough or a friendship old enough to save him from what comes next. Reese looked at the frozen dot on the screen, still not moving, still silent, I want operational command, she said. Major, I want operational command of the recovery effort, Colonel. Not advisory, not consulting. Command. Her voice didn't shake this time. Couldn't afford to. I have 6 years of field experience your QRF commander doesn't have. I have intelligence on the exact nature of this compromise that nobody else in that convoy's chain of command currently possesses. And I have a level of motivation that I promise you no training exercise could ever replicate. Another pause. Long enough that Reese could hear, faintly, the sound of other voices in the background, on Whitfield's end, other officers arguing, other pieces of an unfolding crisis grinding against each other in real time. Directorate 9 would need to authorize that, Whitfield said. This isn't my call alone to make. Then get me someone who can make it, Reese said. Fast, Colonel. Because every minute we spend deciding who's in charge is a minute my sister might not have. The authorization came through 9 minutes later. 9 minutes that felt like 9 years, spent pacing a windowless room, while Okafor worked 3 screens at once, and analysts around them spoke in the clipped, urgent shorthand of people racing against a clock they couldn't see. Director Wells, a woman Reese had met exactly twice in 6 years, both times briefly, both times under circumstances too classified to remember, clearly came on the line herself. Voice crisp. No wasted words, Major Calloway. You understand what you're asking for? I understand exactly what I'm asking for, ma'am. This isn't standard procedure. Personal connection to an active hostage or casualty situation typically disqualifies an officer from operational command, not qualifies them for it. I'm aware of the standard, ma'am. I'm asking you to make an exception, because I'm the only person in this chain of command who has both the field experience and the specific intelligence needed to move fast and move correctly. Every minute spent bringing someone else up to speed is a minute my sister's convoy sits exposed. A pause. Reese could picture the woman on the other end, sharp-eyed, unreadable, the kind of officer who'd built a career on never once letting emotion drive a decision. If I grant this, Wells said, and it goes wrong, Major, there will be no protecting you from the consequences, personal or professional. Understood. And if your judgment is compromised by what's at stake here, if I see one decision that looks like it's driven by fear, instead of training I will personally relieve you of command mid-operation. Am I clear, Crystal, ma'am? Another pause. Shorter this time. Command authorized, Wells said. God help all of us if this goes sideways. Godspeed, Major. The line went dead. Reese exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, and turned to the room, and felt something settle into place inside her chest. Not calm, exactly. Something harder than calm. Something with edges. Okafor, she said. Pull me everything on that ridgeline. Terrain, weather, every asset within striking distance. We move in 10 minutes. The operations room transformed around her. Maps unfurled across screens. Satellite imagery, grainy and gray under a lowering ceiling of cloud, showed a narrow mountain road cutting through dense tree line roughly 90 miles northwest of Fort Ashworth, remote enough that cell coverage was spotty even under normal conditions, isolated enough that whoever had planned this ambush had clearly understood exactly what kind of silence that isolation would buy them. Talk to me, Reese said, standing at the center of the room, voice cutting clean through the noise around her. What do we know? Convoy of 4 vehicles, an analyst reported, pulling up a manifest. 22 personnel, including Major Calloway, sorry. The other Major Calloway, he corrected quickly, catching himself, and Reese didn't have time to find the moment strange, though some distant part of her filed it away regardless. 2 Major Callaways, one in a war room, one somewhere in the dark, status unknown. Continue, she said. Last confirmed position was a checkpoint 11 miles short of the training site, roughly 40 minutes before the convoy went dark. Given the terrain and travel time, they'd have been somewhere along this stretch. Here, he traced a line across the screen, a narrow road winding between 2 ridgelines, thick tree cover on both sides when contact occurred. Killbox, Reese said quietly, studying the terrain. High ground on both sides. One road in, one road out. Whoever set this up chose the location on purpose. which supports the compromise theory, Okafor said. This isn't opportunistic. Somebody with root knowledge picked this exact stretch. Reese's jaw tightened, because that meant Foster Bragg hadn't just leaked a schedule. He'd handed someone a map with a target already circled on it. QRF status, she said, 31 minutes out. Weather's holding them to ground transport. Air support's grounded until the ceiling lifts. 31 minutes. Reese stared at the frozen dot on the map, willing it, uselessly, to move. That's not fast enough, she said. It's the fastest asset we have, the analyst said, apologetic, helpless in the particular way people become when physics and geography refuse to bend for urgency. Reese closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Because there had to be something faster. Because 31 minutes was 31 minutes too many. And somewhere out there, her sister was either fighting for her life or already past fighting, and every second Reese spent standing in this room doing nothing but staring at screens felt like a small, personal betrayal. Then her eyes opened, and something in them had changed. What about me? She said. Okafor looked up sharply. Major, how fast can you get me a vehicle and a direct route to that ridge line? Not through the checkpoint, through the terrain. Major, that's not how this works. You're commanding this operation from here. I'm commanding this operation, Reese said, voice flat and absolutely certain, which means I decide where command needs to be, and right now I'm telling you it needs to be closer than this room. That's insane, Okafor said. Not disrespectfully. Just honestly, the way a man says something he genuinely believes needs saying. You'd be running command and executing a field insertion simultaneously. That's not protocol. That's exactly what I trained for, Reese said. For 6 years, Okafor. This is the job. Get me a vehicle. He stared at her for 1 more second. Then, slowly, nodded the particular nod of a man who's just watched someone make a decision he can't stop, and has decided, instead, to make it work as well as it possibly can. There's a service road, he said, pulling up a different section of the map, tracing a thin gray line that split off from the main highway and cut directly through the terrain toward the ridge. Unmaintained. Rough. But it'd cut your travel time by more than half if the vehicle can handle it. It'll handle it, Reese said. Get me weapons. Get me comms. Get me a driver who knows that road. Yes, Major. She was already moving toward the door, mind running 3 steps ahead of her feet, cataloging everything she'd need, every contingency, every piece of terrain and timing that might determine whether her sister came home tonight. Major, Okafor's voice stopped her at the door. For what it's worth, I hope you find her. Reese looked back at him, at the room full of people working, in their own careful, methodical way, toward the exact same goal that was tearing her chest open from the inside. I'm not going to find her, she said quietly. I'm going to bring her home. The service road was every bit as rough as Okafor had promised, the vehicle jolting hard over ruts and loose gravel as it climbed through dense tree line, under a sky gone the color of wet slate. Reese sat in the passenger seat, weapon across her lap, secure comm unit pressed to her ear, listening to updates that arrived in fragments, each one landing like a small blow to the chest. QRF at 22 minutes and closing. 22 minutes was still an eternity. Satellites picked up thermal signatures near the last known position. Multiple. Can't distinguish friendly from hostile at this range. Multiple signatures. Which meant something. Which meant not everyone in that convoy was gone. At least a small, desperate mercy she held on to with both hands. The driver, a young corporal named Reyes, who'd been pulled from base security detail 20 minutes earlier, with barely enough time to grab a rifle, kept glancing sideways at her, uncertain, clearly unused to taking orders from someone who existed entirely outside his normal chain of command. Ma'am, he said finally, voice tight over the engine noise, can I ask who exactly are you? Reese didn't look away from the terrain ahead, scanning the tree line the way she'd been trained to scan every tree line for the last 6 years, looking for shapes that didn't belong, movement that didn't match the wind. I'm the person who's going to need you to drive faster, she said. Reyes pressed the accelerator down. The comm crackled again, 12 minutes into the drive, and this time the voice on the other end wasn't an analyst reading updates. It was Whitfield himself, tension threading through every syllable. Major Calloway, we have a partial visual from a passing satellite pass. I need you to brace for what I'm about to tell you. Reese's whole body went cold. Say it, she said. 2 vehicles from the convoy show significant damage. 3rd vehicle appears intact, but stationary. 4th is unaccounted for, may have broken off during initial contact. Maybe pinned somewhere the satellite can't see. Casualties, Reese said. The word came out steady. It cost her everything to make it sound steady. Unconfirmed. Thermal signatures show movement near the intact vehicle. That's the best I can give you right now, Major. Movement, which meant someone at least was still moving, which meant hope, thin and fragile as it was, still existed inside whatever hell had unfolded on that ridgeline. Which vehicle was Danielle assigned to? Reese asked. Voice sharper now, cutting straight through procedure to the only question that mattered. A pause. The particular pause of a man checking something he already suspects the answer to. 3rd vehicle, Whitfield said quietly. The one showing movement near it. Reese closed her eyes. Let one single breath of relief move through her, fast and total, before locking it back down beneath the discipline that had carried her through 6 years of exactly this kind of impossible waiting. Because movement wasn't confirmation. Because movement could mean anything. Could mean survivors defending a position, or could mean something far worse that she refused, absolutely refused, to let her mind wander toward. ETA to my position, she said. 14 minutes, Major. You'll beat the QRF by roughly 6. 6 minutes. 6 minutes of being the only friendly asset on that ridgeline, facing whatever had put multiple vehicles out of commission and stopped a trained convoy in its tracks. Understood, Reese said. I'm going in, Major. That's against every protocol 6 minutes could be the difference between my sister making it and not, Colonel. I'm going in. She ended the transmission before he could argue further. Because arguing cost time, and time was the one resource she couldn't afford to spend on anything except closing the distance between herself and that ridge line. The vehicle stopped a half-mile out, hidden by dense tree line. Engine cut. The sudden silence after so much engine noise, feeling enormous and strange. This is as close as I can get without exposing us, Reyes said, voice low now. Some of his earlier uncertainty replaced by the particular sharpened focus that comes when a situation stops being theoretical. Reese checked her weapon, checked her comm. Felt the old, familiar rhythm settle over her body, the one that lived dormant most days. Buried under insurance claims and grey carpet and a mother's disappointed sighs, but had never actually left, never actually faded. It was simply waiting. Stay with the vehicle, she told Reyes. Keep the engine ready. If this goes bad, I need an exit route that doesn't cost more lives than it saves. Ma'am, I should come with. You're base security corporal, not field trained for this. I need you exactly where you are, doing exactly what I told you. Her voice softened, just slightly, just enough. You're not useless here. You're the reason we might get out at all. Understood? Reyes swallowed hard. Nodded. Understood, ma'am. Reese moved into the tree line. The forest closed around her fast, dense and dark under a sky already losing its light early to the weight of the storm rolling in. She moved the way she'd been trained to move, low, quiet, deliberate. Each step placed with the particular care of someone who understood exactly how much noise could cost. The sound of gunfire reached her before the ridgeline came into view. Sparse, controlled bursts, not chaos, the specific rhythm of trained personnel holding a defensive position rather than a full firefight in progress, which meant, for now, at least, someone was still fighting, which meant her sister might still be alive. Reese's heart hammered against her ribs, fast and hard, and she let the fear move through her, because fighting it cost energy she needed for everything else. Because fear wasn't the enemy here. Untrained panic was, and 6 years of discipline had taught her, over and over, the difference between the two. She crested a low rise, and the scene below opened up in front of her all at once. Two vehicles, exactly as the satellite had shown, scarred and smoking at the roadside. A third pulled into a defensive position, behind a natural rock formation. Personnel visible in tactical crouches around it. Weapons trained outward at the tree line on the opposite ridge where muzzle flashes still occasionally flickered through the gathering dusk. And there, a figure near the third vehicle, dark hair escaping a helmet gone askew, moving with the particular controlled urgency of someone directing others despite an injury. Reese could see, even from this distance, one arm cradled awkwardly against her side. Danielle, alive, moving, commanding, even now, even wounded, the position around her with the same steady authority Reese had watched her carry across a graduation stage years ago. Relief crashed through Reese so hard it nearly buckled her knees. She didn't let it. Instead, she keyed her calm, voice low and urgent. "This is Ghost 6, approaching from the northeast ridge. I have eyes on the friendly position. I need a sitrep before I move closer." A pause, then a voice she didn't recognize, tight with strain. "Ghost 6, this is Wait. Who is this?" "This channel is. I have operational command of this recovery," Reese said, cutting through the confusion fast. "No time for procedural niceties. I need your status now." Another pause, shorter this time. "Multiple wounded. 2 critical. We're pinned from the west ridge. Estimate 6 to 8 hostiles with sustained fire capability. 4th vehicle's crew is unaccounted for. Believe they're pinned separately about 200 meters south. 200 meters south. Cut off. Alone. Vulnerable in a way that made Reese's chest tighten all over again. QRF is 6 minutes out," Reese said. "I need you to hold that position, and I need someone to point me toward the 4th vehicle's last known location." "Ghost 6, with respect, who exactly are you, and why should we?" "Because I'm Major Calloway," Reese said, voice hard now, absolutely certain. "And Captain Calloway down there is my sister. And I am not asking permission to go find the rest of your people. I'm telling you I'm going." Silence on the line. Then, quieter. "Understood, Major. Last known position was along the tree line, southeast of the main contact point. Watch your approach. Hostiles have that whole stretch under partial observation." "Copy that." Reese moved. The next 4 minutes stretched and compressed in the strange, elastic way time always did in moments like this, each second simultaneously too fast and unbearably slow, her whole body running on instinct honed across 6 years of training that had, until this exact moment, felt like it belonged to a different life entirely. She moved through the tree line in short, careful bursts, staying low, staying quiet, the sound of sporadic gunfire from the main contact point providing just enough cover noise to mask her own movement. Every sense stretched taut, every shadow catalogued and dismissed, or catalogued and held onto, depending on what it might mean. She found the 4th vehicle's crew exactly where the voice on the radio had promised. 4 soldiers pressed into a shallow depression along the tree line, weapons trained outward, one of them bleeding steadily from a wound in his shoulder that his companions were working, with visibly shaking hands, to stabilize. "Friendly," Reese called out low, before she got close enough to be mistaken for anything else. "Ghost 6, approaching from your 6 o'clock. 4 weapons swung toward her anyway, instinct faster than trust. Before recognition, or at least the recognition of rank insignia and a controlled, steady approach made them lower slowly. "Ma'am," the uninjured soldier closest to her said, voice ragged with adrenaline and relief in equal measure. "We didn't think anyone knew we were separated." "I know now," Reese said, crouching beside them, quickly assessing the wounded soldier's injury, with hands that hadn't done this kind of work in longer than she cared to admit, but hadn't forgotten how either. "QRF is minutes out. I need you 4 to hold here and stay low." "Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good." She checked the wound one more time, applied pressure where pressure was needed, murmured instructions the soldier's shaking companions could follow even through their fear. Then she rose, weapon ready, eyes already tracking back toward the main contact point, where her sister was still holding a defensive line against a threat that had come, however indirectly, from a man their whole family had trusted for 30 years. "Where are you going?" the soldier asked, voice tight with the particular fear of someone about to be left alone in the dark. "To end this," Reese said. "Hold your position. Help is coming." She circled wide, using the terrain the way 6 years of training had taught her to use terrain. Every rise, every stand of trees, every shadow deployed as a tool rather than an obstacle. The hostile position, when she finally located it, sat exactly where basic tactical logic suggested it would, elevated, covered, commanding a clear line of fire down onto the road where the convoy sat trapped. 6 shooters, spread across a shallow ridge, weapons trained on Danielle's defensive position below. Reese studied them for a long moment, cataloging spacing, weapon types, the particular discipline, or lack of it, in how they held their positions. Not military trained, not precisely, but not amateurs either. Someone had prepared them. Someone had given them a map, a timeline, a target. Someone named Foster Bragg. The thought settled into her chest like a stone, cold and heavy, and she let it fuel something instead of paralyze her, the particular controlled fury that 6 years of training had taught her to channel rather than suppress. She keyed her calm, voice barely above a whisper. "Go 6 to friendly position. I have eyes on the hostile ridge. 6 shooters, spread formation, elevated position with clear sightline to your location. I'm going to need you to hold fire on my mark and be ready to move the moment that pressure lifts." Danielle's voice came back over the channel, and something in Reese's chest cracked wide open at the sound of it. Steady, controlled, alive. "Copy that, Go 6, standing a pause. Then, quieter, uncertain, "Do I know you?" Reese's throat tightened. "Later," she said. "Hold position." What followed happened fast, the particular controlled speed of trained action rather than chaos. Each movement deliberate even under the crushing weight of everything riding on it. Reese moved into position along a natural rock formation that offered both cover and a clean line toward the hostile ridge. She steadied her breathing, the old rhythm returning without effort, her father's whisper from 21 years ago rising unbidden from some deep, quiet place inside her. "Breathe out. Let it go. Squeeze, don't pull." The first shot found its mark before the hostile position even registered the new threat entering the engagement. 1 shooter down, the sudden shift in the exchange of fire rippling visibly through the remaining 5 as they scrambled to reassess a threat they hadn't accounted for. Reese moved again, repositioning fast, denying them a fixed target, using every scrap of terrain the ridge offered while below her. Danielle's position surged forward, using the sudden confusion to press an advantage that hadn't existed 60 seconds earlier. The engagement that followed lasted less than 3 minutes, though it would live, afterward, as something far longer and far heavier in the memory of everyone who survived it. Controlled fire, careful movement, the particular terrible efficiency of trained personnel finally regaining the upper hand against an ambush that had, until this exact moment, held every advantage. By the time the QRF's vehicles crested the ridge road behind them, engines roaring, the hostile position had gone silent. Some fled into the deepening tree line, others down and no longer a threat. The specific arithmetic of violence Reese had spent 6 years learning to live with settling, once again, into her chest like a weight she'd carry long after tonight ended. She rose from cover slowly, weapon still ready, scanning the ridge one final time for any threat that remained. Then she moved down toward the road, toward the vehicle, toward her sister. Danielle was on her feet when Reese reached her, one arm cradled against her side, face pale beneath dirt and dried blood from a cut along her hairline, but standing, alive, breathing. Their eyes met across the wreckage-strewn road, and for one long moment neither of them said anything at all. Because what do you say? Because there wasn't a sentence built for this, for the particular collision of relief and horror and love that comes from watching your sister walk out of an ambush alive after believing, for one endless stretch of minutes, that you might never see her again. "Ghost 6, Danielle said finally, voice rough, disbelieving. That's you. That call sign. That's been you this whole time. Reese crossed the remaining distance between them and pulled her sister into an embrace, careful of the injured arm, careful of everything, holding on like 6 years of distance could somehow be closed in a single moment if she just held tight enough. "I'm here," Reese said, voice breaking for the first time all night. "I'm here. You're safe." Danielle's good arm came up around her, gripping tight, her breath shaking against Reese's shoulder. "You came for me," Danielle said. "You actually, Reese. You ran into an active ambush for me." "Of course I did." Reese pulled back just enough to look at her sister's face, at the dirt and blood and the particular exhausted relief written across it. "You're my sister. There was never a version of tonight where I wasn't coming." Danielle laughed, wet and broken and real. "I used to make excuses for you at family dinners," she said. "Turns out, I should have been making excuses for how badly I was underestimating you. We can workshop the toast for next Thanksgiving," Reese said, and something in the exhausted, adrenaline-soaked absurdity of the moment made them both laugh. Sharp and short and full of everything neither of them had words for yet. Medics converged around them then, the QRF fanning out to secure the area, the particular controlled chaos of an operation transitioning from crisis to recovery. Someone pulled Danielle gently toward a waiting vehicle for treatment. Reese stayed close, refusing to let more than a few feet separate them. The fear still too fresh, too recent, to trust distance yet. "Reese." Danielle's voice quieter now as a medic worked on her arm. "That name. Ghost 6. One of the guys back at base, he swears it's not real. Says it's just something people whisper about, some kind of legend nobody's ever actually confirmed." Reese looked at her sister, at the disbelief and awe tangled together on her exhausted face. "It's real," Reese said quietly. "It's been real the whole time." The Ridge Road, 3 hours later, had transformed into a scene of organized aftermath. Medical personnel, recovery vehicles, investigators beginning the careful work of documenting exactly what had happened and exactly who had made it happen. Danielle sat in the back of a medical transport, arm now properly splintered, a blanket around her shoulders, despite the mild temperature, the particular shock-driven cold that follows survival settling into her bones. Reese stood a short distance away, comm unit pressed to her ear, listening to Whitfield's voice deliver news that landed like a second wound on top of everything the night had already cost her. "We picked up Bragg an hour ago," Whitfield said. "Local police, working off the Flag Directorate 9, pushed out the moment your convoy went dark. He didn't run, didn't even try." "Where is he now?" Reese asked. Voice flat, carefully flat. "Holding facility outside the city. He's requested to speak with you specifically, Major." A pause. "You don't have to go, if that's not something you can handle tonight." Reese looked back toward the medical transport, toward her sister sitting wrapped in a blanket, alive by margins narrower than Reese ever wanted to think about too closely. "I'll go," she said. "I need to hear it from him directly." The holding facility sat in a low, unremarkable building on the outskirts of the city, fluorescent lights humming the same tired hum as the insurance office Reese had spent 6 years pretending to belong in. She walked through security checkpoints she barely registered, mind narrowed down to a singular purpose. Foster Bragg sat in a small interview room, hands cuffed loosely to the table in front of him, looking smaller than Reese remembered, older, grayer, the particular collapse of a man who'd spent months carrying a secret that had finally, catastrophically, broken free of him. He looked up when she entered, and something in his face crumpled entirely at the sight of her. "Reese," he said, voice thick. "God. Reese, I didn't. I need you to know I didn't want this. Any of it." Reese stood at the far side of the table, arms crossed, every muscle in her body still humming with the residual adrenaline of a firefight she'd walked away from an hour earlier. "My sister almost died tonight," she said. Quiet, even. "2 of her soldiers are in surgery right now, because of information you sold." Foster's face crumpled further, tears cutting clean tracks through the grime on his cheeks. "They had my son," he said, voice breaking apart entirely. "Reese, they had Danny's business." It collapsed. He owed people, dangerous people. And then this organization reached out, and they didn't ask me for money. They asked for information. Small pieces at first. Nothing that seemed like it mattered. It mattered, Reese said. It mattered enough to get people shot tonight. I know that now. Foster's shoulders shook. I told myself it was nothing. Routing details. Nothing operational. Nothing that could actually hurt anyone. And then they asked for more. And by the time I understood what I'd actually become part of, I didn't know how to stop it without losing everything, my son. My freedom, everything. Reese studied him for a long moment. At the man who'd held her mother's hand at her father's graveside. At the man whose name had lived, for 30 years, in the specific, trusted space reserved for family that wasn't blood. You could have come to us, she said quietly. You could have told my father's memory meant something, and asked for help instead of selling out the daughter of the man you called your closest friend. Foster's face crumpled entirely, grief and shame tangled together into something that looked, for one unguarded moment, almost unbearable to witness. I know, he said. I've known it every single day, since I made the first call. I just didn't know how to climb back out once I was already in. Reese felt something in her chest twist, not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever fully, but something adjacent to it. Something that recognized, even through the fury, the particular tragedy of a good man cornered into something monstrous by circumstances that had, at some point, stopped being entirely his fault and started being entirely his responsibility anyway. My sister could have died tonight, she said again, because it needed saying, because grief and understanding didn't cancel out consequence. 2 other soldiers are fighting for their lives right now. I know, Foster said again, barely audible now. I'll answer for all of it, whatever that means. I just needed you to know I never wanted this. I loved your father. I love your family. I let fear turn me into something I don't recognize. And I will spend whatever time I have left trying to understand how that happened. Reese looked at him for one more long moment. Then she turned and walked out of the room and didn't look back. Outside, the night air had gone sharp and cold, the storm that had threatened all evening finally breaking loose in a thin, steady rain. Reese stood beneath the overhang outside the facility, breathing it in, letting the cold clear some of the fog that 6 hours of adrenaline and grief and fury had left thick behind her eyes. Her phone buzzed, her mother's ringtone. She answered immediately. Reese, Carol's voice tight with fear that hadn't yet found relief. Whitfield's office called. They said Danielle was hurt. They said there was an ambush. They wouldn't tell me anything else. They said I needed to talk to you directly. Reese, is she alive? Please, just tell me she's alive. She's alive, Mom. Reese's voice broke on the words, the exhaustion of the entire day finally catching up to her all at once. She's hurt, but she's alive. I got her out. A sound came through the phone that Reese would remember for the rest of her life, her mother's breath collapsing into something between a sob and a prayer. 6 years of quiet worry and 30 years of a mother's particular terror releasing all at once. You got her out, Carol said, disbelieving. Reese, you went in there yourself? I did. You could have died. I didn't. That's not the same as could have, Carol said, voice fierce now, fear transforming rapidly into something closer to furious pride. God, Reese, what kind of woman did I raise? Reese laughed, wet and exhausted, tears finally slipping free now that the adrenaline had nowhere left to hide them. The kind you're allowed to be proud of, Mom, she said quietly, finally, out loud. Both of us. The days that followed moved slow and strange, the particular exhausted stillness that follows crisis, when a body finally allows itself to feel everything it postponed feeling in the moment survival required. Danielle spent 3 days in the hospital, arm properly set, the cut along her hairline, stitched and healing, her spirits, despite everything, remarkably intact, buoyed by the particular resilience of someone who'd built a career out of surviving hard things and had simply added one more to the list. Reese visited every day, sat by the hospital bed in the same plane, unremarkable clothes she'd worn for 6 years of careful invisibility. Except now, there was nothing invisible left about her. Not to this family. Not anymore. You know what's funny? Danielle said. On the second day, propped up against hospital pillows, arm in a sling, watching her sister with an expression that had shifted, somewhere in the last week, into something entirely new. All those years I thought I was the one carrying the family, the successful one, the one everyone could point to and say, "See, at least one of our daughters turned out fine." "You did turn out fine," Reese said. "More than fine." "Sure, but so did you, Ree. The whole time. I just couldn't see it because you'd built the whole thing so I wouldn't." Danielle shook her head slowly. "I keep thinking about all those years I felt sorry for you. All those times I told myself I needed to be gentle with you because you clearly hadn't found your footing yet." A short, disbelieving laugh. "Meanwhile, you were out there bleeding for something bigger than either of our careers put together." "It's not a competition," Reese said softly. "I know. I want you to know I see it now. All of it. The wall you built. Why you built it. What it cost you to keep it standing for 6 years." Danielle reached over with her good arm, gripped Reese's hand tight. "Thank you. For everything you gave up, so the rest of us could sleep easy not knowing." Reese squeezed her sister's hand back, throat too tight for words for a long moment. "I'd do it again," she said finally. "Every single time. That's what family means to me. Even the version of family that never knew what I was actually protecting them from." The investigation into Foster Bragg's cooperation with the Ledger unfolded over the following weeks with the particular grinding thoroughness of federal proceedings, evidence catalogued, testimony gathered, a case built layer by careful layer toward whatever consequence the law would eventually decide fit a crime this complicated. Reese testified twice, in closed sessions, her own classified status carefully protected even within the proceedings meant to hold Foster accountable. She watched him from across a room during the second session, smaller each time she saw him, the particular collapse of a man finally facing the full weight of what fear had made him become. She didn't hate him. That surprised her, in a quiet, private way, the fury she'd carried in that first interview room slowly settling into something more complicated over the following weeks. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding maybe. The particular understanding that comes from knowing, intimately, exactly how thin the line can be between good people and desperate ones. Exactly how easily circumstances can push a person toward choices they never imagined themselves capable of making. "Do you think he deserves mercy?" her mother asked her once, on a quiet evening in December, the two of them sitting together at Carol's kitchen table over tea that had, for once, actually been drunk instead of going cold and untouched. Reese thought about it for a long moment. "I think he deserves consequences," she said finally. "I think what he did put real people in real danger, and that has to matter, has to count for something in whatever happens to him next." A pause. "But I also think about Dad, about how much he trusted Foster. And I think Dad would have wanted someone to remember the difference between a man who chose evil and a man who got cornered into it by circumstances too big for him to escape alone." Carol was quiet for a moment, turning her mug slowly between her hands. "Your father always did see the whole person," she said softly, "even when the rest of us only wanted to see the parts that were easy to judge." "I think that's where I got it from," Reese said. "Whatever this is, this need to look for the whole picture instead of the easy version." Carol reached across the table, took her daughter's hand. "I'm glad you did," she said, "both for Foster's sake and for your own. I don't think carrying hatred that heavy would have done you any favors. Not after everything else you've had to carry these last 6 years." Foster Bragg eventually accepted a plea agreement that acknowledged both his crime and his cooperation testimony against the broader network that had exploited his desperation, a sentence that reflected genuine consequence without erasing the complicated humanity of how he'd arrived there in the first place. Reese learned, later, that a portion of his cooperation helped Directorate 9 dismantle 2 additional cells connected to the Ledger's domestic network, a small measure of good pulled reluctantly. from an otherwise devastating chain of choices. It wasn't redemption exactly, but it was something. And Reese found, in the weeks that followed, that something was enough to let her set the weight of it down, at least most days, at least enough to breathe around it. Christmas arrived 3 weeks later, and the Calloway house, filled with a warmth that felt different than any holiday Reese could remember in the last 6 years, not because the decorations had changed, or the food, or the particular chaos of too many relatives crammed into too small a kitchen, but because something underneath all of it had shifted permanently. Danielle's arm was out of the sling by then, though she still favored it carefully, the particular stiff caution of healing tissue not yet fully trusted. She stood in the kitchen doorway, watching her mother fuss over a turkey that was, once again, threatening to come out slightly dry, and caught Reese's eye across the room with a grin that carried none of the old, careful distance that had once lived between them. "Hey," Danielle said, crossing to stand beside her sister at the window, both of them looking out at a yard dusted lightly with the season's first real snow. "Hey, I've been thinking," Danielle said, "about how I want to introduce you to people from now on. Because my sister, the temp worker, clearly doesn't cut it anymore, and I can't exactly say my sister. Major Calloway, Directorate 9, codename Ghost 6 at every family gathering." Reese laughed, warm and easy in a way that had felt impossible just 2 months earlier. "You could just say my sister," she offered. "That one still works fine." "It does," Danielle agreed. "It always did, actually. I just didn't understand everything that was hiding underneath it." They stood together at the window for a long moment, comfortable in a silence that no longer needed filling, watching snow settle over their mother's yard the way it had settled every December of their childhood, back when the biggest mystery in either of their lives was who'd get the last piece of pie. "Dad would have loved this," Danielle said quietly. "Both of us, exactly as we are. No more pretending." Reese thought about her father's quiet nods, about a rifle in a 7-year-old's hands, and a whisper about breathing, about letting go, about the particular value of things that never needed applause to be real. "I think he already knew," she said softly. "I think some part of him always suspected there was more to me than the version everyone else got to see. I just wish I'd had the chance to tell him myself." Danielle wrapped an arm around her sister's shoulders, careful of her still healing arm, and Reese leaned into it, into the warmth of a family finally whole, in a way it hadn't been in longer than either of them had realized. "He knows now," Danielle said. "Wherever he is. I have to believe he knows now." From the kitchen, Carol's voice called out, bright and full in a way that hadn't been true in years. "Girls, dinner's ready, and Reese, honey, I want you sitting right next to me tonight. I've got 6 years of stories to catch up on, and I don't intend to miss a single one." Reese looked at her sister, at the warm light spilling from the kitchen, at a family that had spent 6 years misunderstanding her completely and had finally, painfully, wonderfully, found their way to the truth. "Coming, Mom," she called back. And, for the first time in longer than she could remember, Reese Calloway walked toward her family without a single wall standing between them.